Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on this lightning talk, second lightning talk post-lunch. Hopefully the lunch was good. Hopefully you have refreshed enough after the last lightning talk. The topic of today's discussion is going to be about the Don't Do This guide to OpenTelemetry. Now, I've been using OpenTelemetry now for about 2.5 years, both in production, both as a tooling provider internally. I'll talk a lot about that later on. But these are essentially lessons from real-world implementations, both within my own company. I say my company, I don't own that. I work for a company, implementation there, as well as making it available for end users and how or what they might have done or should not have done. So hopefully some of these things might be very obvious to some of you. For the others, it's like, oh yeah, we should definitely not be doing that. Or maybe there is one or two out there which is like, okay, when we do it next time, we'll do it a little bit differently now. So with that, that's going to be the talk for today. A little bit about myself. I am considered a reasonably friendly human being, as you will notice over here. So if you want to talk to me afterwards or later on, that's going to be perfectly okay. I am Buddha. I am the Director of Product Ecosystem at Tyke. I'm also the board chair for the Open API Initiative. Just finished a marathon 3.5-hour workshop on the education aspect of Open API, and I'm very, very happy to be here. I've also, the couple of things that I do want to highlight here, which is sort of co-creating an API platform maturity model, and then being a program instructor for an API Observability Fundamentals program. So some of the lessons, again, come from being able to look at the bigger picture of where OpenTelemetry and observability and APIs sort of map and work together. So in this specific context, when I'm talking about OpenTelemetry and its implementation, I'm going to be talking about API observability a little bit more specifically. Now, these don't do things would be applicable in other cases as well, but my own experience is with APIs and API observability, so I'm going to stick to what I know best. So, also a fan of horror movies and musical, by the way, in case you want to talk about that. But I do caveat that by saying I like my horror on screen and not in my observability pipelines. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Cool. A little bit about that experience that I just talked to you about. I make it sound like I've been here for ages and I'm really, really old as a person. I am not. It's just been a couple of years working with OpenTelemetry. But this all started by just looking at solutions or ways to look at distributed tracing for end-to-end viewpoints of API platform stacks. And once again, if I just give you a background of Tyke and the company that I work for, we are an API management platform with an open source API gateway. So now that forms a pretty critical aspect of any API platform stack that exists today. And if anyone's actually built one in an enterprise environment, that usually consists of multiple components and multiple services, all of them trying to work together to accomplish certain things. And when something goes wrong, then you're trying to figure out where that all is coming from. And therefore, that kind of led to us trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? How can we do things better to understand or get better insights into this end-to-end platform stack that we are working on? So we first adopted this internally. We first adopted OpenTelemetry within Tyke a couple of years ago, looking at how we can better use or better enhance our own pipelines to make deployments and production-ready capabilities of our own product a little bit better. We had a whole range, a whole suite of learnings that came out of it. One of the areas that we were using it was actually for our GraphQL capability pipeline, and that had very interesting learnings and lessons as well. But overall, we had a really, really positive experience when we were developing and using it internally. We thought, how about we make this available for our end users as well as part of our API management offering and the open standards nature of our offering as well. So we made OpenTelemetry available for some of the small as well as huge clients that Tyke has in different verticals, financial services being one primary area of it. And just the lessons coming on the back of all of those implementations is pretty much have tried to get these 5 different don't do things when it comes to OpenTelemetry implementation. There could be many more. When I was doing a bit more research, it took me a while to narrow it down, to be fair, because there are a couple of things that can trip you up, as amazing as OpenTelemetry is that I find as an open standard. But there are a couple of things and caveats that you just don't want to trip up on at the wrong time. So a little bit of an insight into sort of some of the really, really simple setups that you can use as a basis for some of these, points that I'm going to be making, just your API users, API gateways, and then your services. At that gateway level, what we're using OTel for is sort of authentication, authorization, rate limiting, some of the security capabilities, some of the governance capabilities, all of that brought in at that gateway level. And if you just expand out that observability stack a little bit more, then you start seeing how the different services, along with OpenTelemetry, its collector, the span metrics connector, and the external observability platforms like Jaeger and Prometheus sort of come into the picture holistically to give that end-to-end viewpoint. So simple enough example. I think some of them can be a little bit more complicated than this, but I've tried to keep it a little bit simple for the purpose of this particular talk. So without further ado, I think I'm so far on time. I'm going to be sharing the 5 don'ts when implementing OTel for API observability. I will admit that I did get stuck a little bit with this don't fantasy that I went into, because trying to add don'ts in your sentence structure can be surprisingly more challenging than I thought it was going to be. But we are down this rabbit hole anyway. So with that, I'm going to start off with the very first don't do this, or as I call don't do this number 1. Don't start without a plan. Yes, this is not a technical thing that I'm going to be portraying over here. It's not a technical thing when it comes to OpenTelemetry. But don't start without a plan. And to add to that, OpenTelemetry, as amazing as it is not your entire observability strategy. It cannot be, it should not be, and please don't make it be so. So with that in mind, there are a couple of things that you do need to answer when you are thinking about your overall API observability strategy, of which OpenTelemetry is going to be a part. So think about your observability strategy holistically. What are your key drivers? What SLOs are you going to be measuring? What is your success metric? What business value are you actually delivering outside of implementing OpenTelemetry within your platform stack? What about governance? What about the ownership aspect of things? What about the versioning aspect of things? What about the security aspect of things? Which libraries are you going to be using? Which languages are you going to be using? Which platforms will you be integrating with as well? And please document everything. These decisions are going to be important, not just on day 1, not just on day 0. It's going to be important on day 100 as well as maybe day 300 as well. So you got to be able to document all of these different things, the decisions that you made, the drivers behind those decisions, all very important. So don't start without a plan. Speaking of which, don't just go ahead and collect everything, please. Now, this tends to be a typical approach for a lot of people initially when their argument tends to be detailed data, or the degree of detail in your data is typically correlated to deeper insights. Maybe okay to a point, but typically what that tells me is that you don't have a plan. You don't know what you're exactly looking for, and you're not being intentional about doing so. So just because you are collecting everything, that's not always the right answer, and that also relates to having higher costs. With managing, maintaining your entire pipelines end-to-end, that can balloon up really, really quickly when you are looking at things at scale. So detailed data, be intentional about how to go about doing this. Look at the high cardinality labels, which attributes to tag, what to store, what to retain, have a strategy around that. Introduce sampling strategies as early as possible, if possible. Use exemplars instead of detailed traces, again, where possible, and then prune unnecessary attributes, because there is a security element to this as well, because you need to know if you're collecting everything, that everything could include things that are a little bit more of the sensitive nature, and exposing some of those things could have much further and deeper repercussions, which we don't want. So with that, number 3, don't disregard security and privacy. In this case, does your OTel configuration contain sensitive data, or PIIs? Are you transmitting those sensitive data in plain text? Are you running OTel collector at the highest privilege or permission as a root? Probably don't do that. So what to do? Implement attribute filtering or sanitization before data exports. Review semantic conventions to ensure sensitive fields are explicitly excluded. Take special extra care if you're working with custom attributes, because there is always a risk of exposing something more right there, because that's not part of the standard itself. Speaking of which, nice segue into don't use custom attributes off the gate. I tend to see this a few times from here and there, where just because it seems to be easy, just because I'm not able to find the right things that I want to, just go ahead and build your own attribute, and that's going to solve everything. That's not the case. So custom attributes cause inconsistent and complicated cross-service. It kind of moves away from your standardization model that you're trying to achieve here. That's not something that we want. So what to do? Prioritize the OpenTelemetry semantic conventions, namespace your custom attributes if you are using them to avoid future conflicts. There might be cases where you may not be able to avoid something like this. One example that we had to go down in this route for custom attributes was GraphQL errors, for instance. So if anybody has used GraphQL errors, error handling in GraphQL out of the box isn't really great. Sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge in terms of how things are dealt with. OpenTelemetry does have some semantic conventions to deal with it, but they are extremely basic, at least as it stands today. So the ideal situation is to expand those semantic conventions, and I think there is a pull request that is trying to look at doing exactly that. But in such situations where you really don't have a choice, custom attributes make sense, but that cannot be your step one or go-to move. Don't use custom attributes. Finally, number 5, don't forget context propagation. This, again, feels like it's a no-brainer in most cases, but the real reason why at least we were looking into something like OpenTelemetry was the ability to look at your entire stack or being able to troubleshoot your entire stack end-to-end. Now, without context propagation, that's not going to be possible. Misconfigured context propagation would lead to broken spans and services to fragmented traces, between services leading to fragmented traces. Then if you consider async operations or messaging queues and background jobs, that makes life a little bit trickier as well when it comes to context propagation. So with that, just an extension perhaps to context propagation, when you are implementing OpenTelemetry, think about the different components that are part of your stack and potentially where OpenTelemetry should be sitting with each one of those. Once again, if the idea is to get an end-to-end view, you cannot be missing or skipping components within your platform stack. So where applicable, add OpenTelemetry, and that's where you'll find the most value. So that is the last one. There is one bonus element which, again, gets overlooked. And again, I know this doesn't feel technical enough, but don't overlook your users. This is relevant for both API observability as well as for the OpenTelemetry. So what I mean by that is when you're thinking about your developers, if you are a platform team making OpenTelemetry traces, metrics, or logs, or maybe profile information available, you need to have some sort of an onboarding strategy available so that the developers who are going to be making use of your platform know what is actually available so that they can use it where possible. If they don't, then there's no point of having that all together. So that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is also around the end users. So consider your end users. How are they using your systems? How are they using your solutions? If you don't understand how they're interacting, in this case, with your APIs, then you're missing half the picture overall as an API provider. OpenTelemetry can definitely help with that if you're considering what the specific use cases and problems you're solving for those users. Hopefully, that kind of made sense. So that's kind of your main 5 points, the 5 don'ts that I wanted to share. There are a few others. We can go into auto-instrumentation, when to use it, when not to use it. There are other aspects that we could go deep diving into. But for the purpose of today, these 5 plus 1 bonus, that is the end of the lightning talk. Thank you so much. If you have questions, I can take one. Yes.
Thank you for the talk. So you said you have this in production. I'm curious, like, what visualization backend are you using, and if you're happy with it?
Yes. When you're talking about backend, are you talking the libraries?
Well, actually front end, but you know what I mean. It's like where you see, you know, all the traces spans are using. We
are using a combination of Grafana and Prometheus at this point to be able to get this, the information around both traces and metrics at this point. The collector that we are using is, I think it's the Go version that we are using at this point in terms of implementation. So yeah, I think those are as many details as I have at this point. Sure. Is it, just for follow-up, is it Grafana open source, or is it like the enterprise or cloud version? I think we started off with open source. I think we went into the paid version after, yes. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Like you should have a strategy. So according to you, like how you analyze a system is over, instrumented or under instrumented? What's the strategy looks like?
So I would caveat that a little bit by saying your strategy should not be static in nature. So you start off with a hypothesis where, based on your initial requirement of your platform and what you're trying to achieve, you make certain decisions. That could be based on what information you're storing and how much of that information you're storing and for how long that information is being stored and where it's being shipped off to, which systems are you integrating with. But what worked on day 1 doesn't necessarily have to work on day 30 perhaps, or maybe day 90. So your strategy needs to be fluid enough, or at least be reviewed enough to say, okay, we did this for 90 days. These are the things that worked well. This is either something that we are missing and we need to expand that a little bit further in terms of what you are tracking, or we say, this is information that we are no longer using. Let's reduce cost of storage and say we no longer need that as part of our observability pipelines. Make sense? All right, thank you. I think, do we have any at this time? Any other question? I think one last question. Otherwise, I'm good. All right. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.